Hello and welcome to the show. This week's FailRace versus the community was B-class cars with 400 or more horsepower, which make choosing your car and choosing what upgrades to use on your car very interesting. In fact, the build I went through many iterations of cars before I settled on a V8 Vantage. Our first race was at the Catalonia National Circuit, and well, everything went wrong very early on. A Hummer got sort of spun around, a Transit spun on his own and caused a big crash. Not quite our biggest of crashes, but yeah, it was a pretty bad crash, this one. Knocked out 4 or 5 cars with very heavy damage, which we don't want to see. It was one of those things, really. I had managed, and I'm not sure how, I'd managed to survive the first corner. Ferrari Testarossa as well had survived the first corner without any significant damage. I got quite lucky in some places with that, just avoiding the chaos. I proceeded to go around the outside of a Dodge Daytona into the hairpin. My Aston Martin was fitted with a maximum width sport tyres, which was proving to be quite good. It did have quite a lot of grip, not quite as good as some of the cars, but it was pretty grippy. A slightly laggy Transit would cause some problems for me. Ended up putting me on the grass, and then I had to sit and wait as about 6 cars filed past, so I couldn't rejoin the track. And all of my hard work from the opening lap was undone, but can't really do very much about a bit of lag here and there. Further up, it was a little bit calmer towards the front of the field, and there was another V8 Vantage that was trying to make a move. This one much faster in a straight line than pretty much everything else around it. Not quite as good through the corners as my one, so I presume more power got into this one and less of the handling part. He tried to be rather brave, and points for effort on that one, trying to go around the outside of a Chevy Nova into turn 1. Can't quite make it stick, and you can see how much the Aston struggles through these corners. Just doesn't have the grip of some of the other vehicles. I had now got a lot of work to do, making my way back past the field of cars that I had survived in turn 1. I get quite brave going around the outside of a Hummer at the top of the hill. That's always a scare. Like, that's an incredibly tough place to overtake. I think there was somebody overtaken in the background of that shot that I didn't notice before. Yeah, I think the Fair Lady Z went around the outside of an El Camino. It's a scary place trying to overtake around the outside of there, just in general. Especially in cars like these that don't really have the handling. Some of them are okay, but they're still not sort of your normal choice for B-class, especially not with this much power. It was the midfield that was the most exciting part of this race. As I said, quite a lot of cars were broken and the field further back became fairly spread out very quickly. This is all over at the moment. I think it was 4th or 5th or 6th place, I think it is. The Holden tried to get up the inside of the Aston, couldn't do it. I have a cheeky overtake on a Ferrari Testarossa that ended up slightly out of position and got a bit boxed in. And then it's all these 2x2s into the hairpin with the Aston stuck on the outside of their respective vehicles. The Testarossa managing to get back up the inside of me. However, you can't really do very much about it, as I get my car to the inside of the next long corner and the Testarossa can't go around the outside. The other Aston Martin having some difficulties with his car, just dipped a wheel on the grass and couldn't get it stopped for the next corner as we sail past, and now we can give chase on the Holden. Yeah, it was interesting to see how different built a lot of the cars were for this challenge. A couple of laps later, and I had a big lock up into turn 1 and fell back. I then rejoined this little group as the Testarossa ran a bit wide coming out of the hairpin, and I have to do things the hard way, trying to go around the outside of a Ferrari that, by the looks of it, yeah, Ferrari running full aero. I keep my car around the outside of one corner. The Ferrari's got the inside for this one. Somehow I'm still holding on around the outside, and eventually the Ferrari can do nothing about it. I'm surprised actually I managed to keep my car around the outside there. Although, to be fair to the Ferrari, the Testarossa does start off at pretty much the top of B-class, so there is very little in the way of upgrades you can do. Like, having the aero on it will have lowered the PI by a little bit, but that car won't have very many upgrades on it at all, so it was doing pretty well, considering. Most of the action in this race was involving one of the 2 Aston Martins. There really wasn't a huge amount going on, if I'm honest, for the most part. This Vantage, phenomenally quick in a straight line, but was really having difficulties with some of the corners. Again, well done for effort into turn 1. Made the move on the El Camino. It was quite a poorly El Camino as well. That's one of the cars that was damaged in the first lap shunt. Just couldn't quite make it stick. The El Camino's got a lot. I can't believe I'm going to say the El Camino has a lot more grip, but it did in that situation. At the front, for quite a while, a Corvette Stingray had led the race. Unfortunately, he was to disconnect halfway through, and he was to hand the lead to a Lamborghini Miura. It's the second time in 2 weeks we've had somebody disconnect from the lead. Yeah, can't really do very much, unfortunately. Yeah, the Miura was never really challenged as such. You can see in the background, second place in the Nova was close, but was never close enough to sort of try any overtakes. And I would finish a rather distant third, having spent most of the race fighting my way back up through the field. It had certainly been an eventful race at Catalunya. We move on to our second race at Indianapolis. I think this might be the first time I've ever used Indianapolis in a FailRace versus the community. I'm not sure. I can't remember using it before. I don't really like using this track for versus community races. First of all, because it's a very fast track, and you know, when we normally run sort of B-class cars, they're not really designed for straight line speed. But I thought it was appropriate for these vehicles, as you know, they're a lot more powerful, a lot more straight line speed orientated. And the other reason I don't use it is because the first corner is normally a mess. This time round, everything went relatively smoothly. There was a Maserati that went off, but that was him out-braking himself. He wasn't pushed. There wasn't that much barging going on. A few people made little errors into the first corner, but we got around the first turn relatively well. I was quite surprised how well we got around turn 1. I again found myself behind yet another Vantage. Vantages were quite a popular vehicle. Vantage, I think, had a little bit of a bump with a Dodge Charger as we come on to this back straight. Of course, on the opening lap, it is always going to be very, very busy on here as everybody kind of tries to settle into a position. I have a look around the outside of a Dodge Charger, but couldn't make the move stick. Further up, and this is the battle for the lead between an Audi of some description. I'm not actually sure what one, that RS6 I think it is, a Dodge Daytona. There's a Lamborghini Miura in there. It is basically an Audi, a modern car, being chased by many, many classic vehicles. I don't know where the highest non-classic vehicle was beside the Audi. The Daytona was probably the quickest car in a straight line. The Miura's having a look. The Shelby comes from absolutely nowhere. The Shelby is ridiculous in a straight line, just cannot deal through the corners. The Daytona is probably one of the better compromises here. That Shelby is absolutely crazy. Almost undrivable through the corners, but unbelievably fast in a straight line. And this is Indianapolis. Half of the course is a banked corner and then a very, very big straight. The Miura gets up the inside of the Daytona while Daytona was trying to find a way past the Audi. Daytona does turn in a little bit on the Miura. The Dodge, though, comes off the worst of the two. And now he's ended up back, caught up with a Ford Thunderbird. There's a Fairlady Z behind them, and then there's me and an Aston behind me. There's another Aston. There was not very many modern cars in it, funnily enough. Not many modern cars in this one whatsoever. Daytona is now coming under threat from the the Thunderbird, sorry, trying to go around the outside. Unlikely, if you can keep your car around the outside there, you may get it on the next corner. Thunderbird can't quite do it. And then there's a little bit of rally crossing from the Ford there, trying to get whatever advantage he can as they run on towards the back straight. I do love the paint job on this Daytona. Very, very cool paint job. Sort of American warplane style thing. I think I've seen a few cars like that. I love those liveries. They always look very cool on here. The Shelby had a brush with the wall. The Shelby was so fast. It was struggling, but these corners were flat. It's quite scary around these corners flat out with cars not really got the handling. But I would imagine this is especially scary in a Shelby that doesn't really handle. The Miura also had a bit of bump on the wall, had some aero damage, and was losing quite a lot of time down the straights. As you saw, these lot all flew past. The Shelby then got into second place and then went back to fighting his car through the corners. The Thunderbird's having a look, trying to get past the Daytona, can't quite do anything. My Aston's caught up now to join in the fray. The Shelby, I don't know where the Shelby's going, ends up out quite wide, just struggling with trying to get any sort of grip. A little bit of lag going on there. Daytona's having a look at the inside, the Shelby's out sideways. I'm trying to go around the outside of a Thunderbird, can't quite do that. I change my mind and give up. The Thunderbird gets 2 overtakes in one go, going up the inside of both the Shelby and the Daytona. I tried to do the same thing on the next corner, cut back to the inside, as the Shelby and Dodge end up out a little bit wide. The FairLady's Zed's in there as well. The Shelby goes and vanishes off because there is a bit of a straight and can just out-accelerate absolutely everything. As we come up towards the next corner under braking, I can just get in front of the Daytona. The FairLady's Zed was having a look at the inside, gets it very, very sideways. I end up out quite wide. Daytona's trying to get back at me but can't do very much. The Dodge gets a little bit of a helping hand from the Nissan as they as they go through that corner. As we run onto the back straight, now begins the drag race down to turn 1. Who's got the fastest car in a straight line? Well, we know the Shelby technically is, but as you can see, he was really fighting for control coming onto this banking, which means he hadn't actually made a huge amount of time on my Aston or on this Dodge. As we come around the banked corner, we hadn't actually been dropped that much by the Shelby. We will now, once we got into a straight bit where there's absolutely no form of cornering to worry about, but things were all pretty close at the front. There was a long line of cars queuing up behind the Audi. There's a FairLady's Zed not far behind either. As we come into turn 1, I ended up out a little bit too wide through there, but can be defensive through the next corner and can hold on to my position. Pretty scary having that huge Daytona right behind you. The highest placed modern car, apart from the Audi, was probably this Challenger. I believe this is 7th, 8th and 9th between the Rampage Challenger. Again, another car that starts off very high in B class, so it wouldn't have very many of the upgrades to work with on that one. There's a Dodge Charger in there and a Vauxhall Monaro. The problem with Indianapolis is that this is pretty or almost organised by straight line speed with the cars further down. There wasn't a huge amount of racing apart from the front group. In this little battle, the Monaro was quick through the corners, but just was nowhere in the straights. The Charger had wonky gear ratios, I think, if I remember from watching the replay. We're still using a 4-speed gearbox. Yeah, it couldn't keep up with the Challenger. At the front, this was where most of the excitement was going on in this race, and it was the Thunderbird that was giving chase to the Audi. Us lot behind had sorted ourselves out, and I now find myself in third, being chased by the rather mental Shelby. It was scary having that thing behind you. As you come around the banked curve, it was the Thunderbird that would take the lead. While it looks like an easy overtake on that replay camera, trust me, it's quite scary going around somebody on that bank curve. These are not high grip cars. A lot of these cars weren't running. Aero won't have had race tyres, won't have had very many handling parts in some cases. Yeah, it is not fun necessarily going around the outside of that corner. Some of the cars were sliding through there. It would be flat out in a lot of cars, but in some of these it was pretty... Well, just watch the Shelby try to go around them. Yeah, it would have been pretty scary to overtake. It's a good overtake to go around there. And they got incredibly blooming close. I found my way past the Audi, and it would be followed by the Shelby and the Daytona. And that is how it would end with the Thunderbird taking the victory. I could not close the gap on the last couple of laps. I was being followed by the Daytona for a little while. The Shelby was just too difficult to control and would drop back to fourth. Going all out on the power parts works to a point. Having a car with a lot of straight line speed works to a point, but even on a track like this, you do still need a little bit of handling. But it was a win for the Ford, while my Aston would take second. It was the first win for the American cars. It was mostly American cars. In these races, there were very few European cars. There was even a Suzuki Liana in the third race at the Sedona Club. Yeah, I was surprised that thing could even get 400 horsepower out of it, but it was here. Now, I started this race in 10th. The Chevy Nova behind me, I think, had started in 12th. Remember that, as we exit turn 1, the two of us had got up to 3rd and 4th. By hugging the inside of that corner, letting all the chaos unfold on the outside, we had made rather large gains through there, and as we came over the top of the hill, there's a bit of an altercation between the two cars, the two leaders, and I now found myself in the lead. Not bad, going from 10th to 1st within half a lap, and the Nova would find himself in second. Yeah, we'd made some pretty big gains on this opening lap. As I said, my Aston was very, very good through the corners. Not as good as the Nova though. I don't know. I know the Nova was on race tyres. I don't know how big a tyre widths it had, but it was certainly noticeable the Nova had a lot more grip However, I had the acceleration and I had the straight line speed. So while through that section, the Nova could be right on my bumper and it could carry more speed through this little chicane. A horrible, horrible chicane, that one. As the Barracuda goes in place, makes some sandcastles, the Nova couldn't keep up with me on the straights. There were many a muscle car in this race, and we have people trying to go too wide. Never a good idea going too wide up here in slidey muscle cars. The Challenger has gone exploring. The Monaro got past the pair of them. The Barracuda was out quite wide. Yeah. This is another track that requires quite a bit of speed. There are plenty of straights here, but there are also some very fast corners, so you normally want a car with quite a lot of grip around this track, and of course these cars were not really cars with a lot of grip. A Mercedes led this little group. A Barracuda was having some problems sliding. The Mercedes lost a position to a Monaro. A Ford Country Squire made up 2 positions in that corner almost. Unfortunately, you can see the Mercedes vanish. Again, a little bit of lag problems. The Barracuda struggled in getting his car turned through the chicane. Gets a little bit of a whack from the Country Squire, and then 3 cars wide was never going to fit here. Unfortunately, yeah. Just trying to fit too many cars into the same bit of road doesn't work, and the Barracuda and the Country Squire ended up pointing the wrong way. The front things were rather close. We were pulling out a huge gap over third place, as third place was changing fairly regularly. I think we were about 2.5 seconds a lap quicker than the rest of the field. We had pulled a huge margin. However, the Nova could not find a way past the Aston. As I said, I had the better straight line speed, I had the better acceleration. However, the Nova would catch me up through the corners, and we just ended up at this sort of stalemate. I would pull a sizable gap through this section up towards the first corner, then the Nova would pull it back through that sort of uphill chicane. I'd then pull away again on the downhill part where there was a bit of a straight, and the Nova would close up through the corners, but the Nova could never get past, even with me being a little bit sideways at some points. Nova could never get past. I was always far enough away when it came to the corners to be safe. Nova would get close, but it wouldn't quite get past. And there was a similar story going on further back. The Monaro was trying to make his way up through the field and was battling with a Challenger. And again, it was a similar story. The Monaro was much better through the corners. Challenger was much faster in a straight line, and the Monaro was having a tough time getting past. Challenger was very wide. Yeah, you're risking when you take that chicane sort of quite wide. It's very dangerous. There's very nasty sort of sticky sand outside. If you get your car caught on it, it'll just stop you instantly, as you saw with the Barracuda at the start. Not very fun going out there. Challenger's got excellent straight line speed. Is caught right up to the lead in battle. Unfortunately, a bit of a laggy bump from the Lincoln saw the Audi fired off into the sand. Everybody's going rally crossing, trying to put some power down out of turn 1. Amazingly, the Lincoln is the car that's in third at the moment, while the rest of these vehicles are trying to fight its way past. Yeah, this is fairly early on. This is within the first few laps, and yeah, you can't see me and the Nova. Everything's sideways over the crest of the hill. The Monaro does an impressive double overtake to get past both of the Dodges. I'm not quite sure how he found a space there. Well done to him, though, for making that one stick. And of course, this is where the Monaro is strong through this section. This is where the handling cars were strong through these couple of tight corners. Because they're probably the tightest corners on this track aside from turn 1. The Lincoln was really struggling with turning, and unfortunately a bit of a laggy bump again saw the Lincoln fired around. He did get a tiny bump from the Monaro, but it certainly shouldn't have been enough to do that. So again, annoyingly, a little bit of lag. Now the Monaro finds himself in trouble though, as the Challenger can just out-accelerate him into the chicane, and the Monaro can do absolutely nothing about it as they come on to the start-finish straight. And this battle carried on for many a laps, and there were many a position change between these three. At the moment, the Challenger is leading it from the Coronet, and the Monaro is looking, trying to make up ground. The Audi, that went off and built some sandcastles, has closed right up to these three. Of course, as they're battling, they're slowing each other down. It was certainly helping me and the Nova out in front, pulling an even bigger lead. This time the Coronet's out very wide through there. You don't really want to be quite that wide. I was amazed he got away with that, not ending up in the sticky stuff. The muscle cars are too wide coming on to the start-finish line. The Monaro just doesn't have the straight line speed to do very much. The Audi is now right back in the fight as they come into turn 1. The Challenger's on the inside. The Coronet's going the long way round and can't quite can't quite keep the position. The Monaro's dived up the inside. The Audi's right in this one as well, side by side through the next corner, and everybody just about squeezes in line before having a rather big crash. Yeah, when I was watching that looked quite scary on the replays. The Challenger was still struggling with grip. He was even getting some airtime over that bump. Yeah, some of these muscle cars did not look that fun to drive over that section. They looked pretty scary, looked pretty difficult to control, I'll be honest. At the front there had been a change of position. I'd run tiny bit wide into the chicane, just caught the sticky stuff. Hadn't cost me a huge amount of time, but it was enough to let the Nova in front, and now we were still stuck in this sort of status quo, just the other way around. The Nova could make enough time through the corners to be far enough out of range by the time it came to the straights. We were setting incredibly similar lap times, the two of us, so the gap was remaining pretty much constant. It was rather infuriating because there was just nothing I could do. I imagine it was the same way when it was the other way around, because there was absolutely nothing that you can do about it. The battle for third was ongoing. They've shuffled positions slightly. The Monaro was leading the way this time from the Challenger, the Coronet and the Audi as they come through the chicane. The Challenger was just a little bit too close, was just trying to push a little bit too hard, and ended up in the sand. So you would lose quite a bit of time getting stuck in there when you go that deep into the sand. The Monaro now has the other Dodge right behind you. You see the amount of time the Dodge gains on this straight. It's right underneath the back of the Vauxhall as they come into turn one, but doesn't have the grip to do anything. Can't put the power down quite as well. The Audi's right in there just in case anything happens. But the Audi has fallen back a little bit. I don't think you can get much closer than that between these two cars as they run up the hill. And then the Monaro can pull a little bit of a gap, although on this occasion there's a bit of rallycross from the Monaro. You certainly don't gain much time doing that. If I don't gain any time doing that, if you're off on the sand, if you're off on the dirt, it slows you down. If you take a perfect line over that hill and you stay on the tarmac, you'll get a lot more speed than going out wide. The Coronet gets a much better line through the next corner. It's right on the back of the Monaro, but this is the tight twisty section where the Monaro has the advantage and the Dodge can't really do anything about it. At the front, and I'd spent the better part of 5 laps staring at the back of a Nova and couldn't do anything about it. I had tried everything I could and I just couldn't get close enough to this Nova, and on the final lap my best chance had already passed. I couldn't really see where I was going to get past the Nova. I was just too far back, and these sections were where the Nova is strong. I had one option left, and that was to be as brave as I can through the chicane. I had nothing to lose. Third place was so far back, so I chucked my Aston Martin at the chicane. The Nova was a little bit slow, and out of nowhere and slightly on 2 wheels, I squeezed my car past the Nova on the inside and could out-drag him to the finish line. I surprised the driver of the Nova. He really did not expect me to be on the inside of that corner. It was a phenomenal race, this one. It was great fun trying to chase down that Nova, and I cannot believe I managed to take enough speed through that chicane. There was, I'd done pretty much everything to make that move stick. Further back, and it looked like the third place squabble was over. As you can see, the Monaro on the final lap had pulled just a bit of a gap back to the Audi and the Coronet. However, the Vauxhall would take just a little bit too much on the sand and would get slowed down. Not massively, but he would get slowed down, sort of screwing up your run onto the straight. The Audi would come flying alongside, but the start line was just a little too soon. Like 20 metres later, and the Audi probably would have had third place. As it was, though, the Monaro got it. It wasn't third place. That was the only very closely fought one. Even further back, this is for 6th, I think it was, between the Challenger that was covering from his time in the sand trap against a Ford Country Squire that had been through the wars most of this race. Again, it was a quick run through the chicane for the Challenger and just better straight line speed that would allow him to pull up alongside and then go around the outside of the Ford as they go across the line. Sedona had given us plenty of good racing. It was, it was good fun, this one. Throughout the field, there was plenty going on. Again, there was a little bit of lag, which was a bit of a shame. There were a couple of broken cars further back. But yeah, Sedona had been a really rather exciting race. This was an interesting versus community. It's almost more interesting building the cars, trying to sort of sort out what parts you need, what compromises you make between handling and power. I do recommend you give it a go. Try and get a B-class car with 400 or more horsepower and still make it handle acceptably. It is actually quite an interesting challenge trying to build a car for this one. However, that is it for this FailRace versus the community. The next one shall be on Thursday the 5th of June. It shall be starting at 7 PM British summertime, and we shall be running open D-class cars. We shall be using sort of the short courses. We did this a while back and it was really good fun. So we're going to do some D-class short course racing on places like Iberian Short, Ladera, maybe Camino Short. I'm not entirely sure yet, but it'll be raced on some sort of tiny tracks. This normally produces some excellent racing as the cars are fairly even, the tracks are hard to overtake on. So yeah, last time it was good fun. So we're going to give that a go again, as we haven't done anything like that for a while. If you wish to sign up and take part, then you should go to our forums. There will be a link in the description. Find the FailRace versus the community section, and yeah, that is where you sign up. However, that is it for today. So thank you very much for watching, and until next time, goodbye.